There was 0 scenes with Raphael and Britney Spears, probably at her request, because I had tweeted her I was going to bring a poster for.
The New York Times actively vouched for the veracity of its false narrative, propping up a story that crumbled the moment real facts began to surface. What we actually want, and what the public deserves, is for all evidence to come out. Every shred of it. Not selective leaks, not twisted spin, but proper and appropriate evidence that tells the full, unvarnished truth. And that is precisely where everything has started collapsing for Blake and her camp. The perception has shifted. People no longer see her as the helpless figure she tried to portray, but as someone hiding behind legal intimidation, leaning on media theatrics, and, in the end, coming off as nothing more than a bully. The humiliation only deepened when her own lawyer, supposedly her shield in this battle, walked away from the case entirely. They could not withstand the avalanche that came crashing down after Justin Baldoni's attorney unveiled such devastating, meticulously prepared evidence that it didn't just poke holes in Blake's defense. It tore the entire foundation out from under it. The impact was seismic, forcing her team to rethink, retreat, and unravel every move they had once thought was clever. One moment Blake stood tall, insisting on her role as a victim, painting herself as the wounded party wronged by a merciless system. And the very next moment her defense collapsed, leaving her stranded as her legal counsel abandoned her faster than passengers fleeing a sinking ship. And let's be brutally honest. When your own lawyer, the person hired to stand by your side, no matter how ugly the fight becomes, finally decides they've had enough and walks away, that's not just a bad sign. It's the loudest, clearest signal that the game is over. At that point, the only path left is humiliation and confession, the full-blown reckoning she had tried so hard to avoid. It becomes a moment where she has no choice but to admit, I am sorry I lied. I am a terrible person, with her tail tucked between her legs, because that is precisely the moment of truth she has earned. And just think about the absurdity of it all. To file the most outrageous lawsuit of your career, to throw out wild accusations with reckless confidence, to paint yourself in public as the ultimate victim of cruelty and injustice, and to weaponize the media by playing the damsel in distress, only to end up deserted by the very lawyer you relied upon to make the illusion stick. That isn't just irony. That is a collapse of an entire strategy, the implosion of a narrative that was never strong enough to survive contact with reality. That's exactly what unfolded when Blake's attorney, Merle Conan, finally reached his breaking point and quit, abandoning a ship that had already taken on more water than anyone could possibly bail out. The turning point came when Justin Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, unleashed an opposition so ferocious and meticulously constructed that it left Blake's entire defense shattered. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a full-scale dismantling. Friedman didn't merely poke holes in Blake's claims. He tore them open seam by seam until nothing was left but a pile of contradictions and implausible excuses. And truly, who could blame Conan for walking away? He had signed on to defend a high-profile client with the promise of prestige, but instead he found himself tethered to a lawsuit collapsing under its own weight, sinking like Titanic on its final night, dragging everyone attached down into the icy depths. Conan wasn't about to let himself drown alongside her. He tested the waters, hesitated, tried to steady the wreck, but ultimately realized that the facts Brian Friedman brought to the table were so undeniable, so crushing in their clarity, that the case was not just weak, it was indefensible. And then, as if the wreckage wasn't already catastrophic, the hammer dropped. Baldoni's team unveiled their arsenal. 170 pages of receipts. Not the flimsy, selectively edited kind that could be brushed off with clever spin, but a towering stack of evidence. Emails, text messages, digital records, so meticulously documented that it read like a novel, each page building a case stronger than the last. This wasn't smoke and mirrors. It was a paper trail that burned through every one of Blake's defenses. The scale of it alone was overwhelming. Judges, reporters, even neutral observers couldn't ignore the sheer volume of proof. And it wasn't just a number of pages that landed like a bombshell. It was the content. The messages weren't ambiguous. They weren't murky. They weren't open to interpretation. They were cold, clear, undeniable facts that didn't just undercut Blake's story. They obliterated it. Those 170 pages turned the tide of the entire battle. They revealed in stark black and white that Blake wasn't the victim she had painted herself to be, but the aggressor, the orchestrator of the chaos. Every claim she had made, every tearful narrative she tried to sell, crumbled as her own words, preserved in writing, betrayed her. Each accusation she leveled was dismantled piece by piece until there was nothing left standing. The courtroom didn't just hear evidence. They witnessed a story collapsing in real time. The spectacle was brutal, humiliating, and irreversible. Her legal team, once confident and combative, could do nothing but scramble helplessly, rifling through papers, whispering frantically, desperate to patch holes that had already blown wide open. They looked less like lawyers and more like actors in a tragedy, performing their defeat for an audience that could only watch in shock. And the sight of it all, the collapse, the unraveling, the sheer desperation, was priceless. It proved, with devastating clarity, a lesson that too many people forget. Allegations are not evidence. A headline is not proof. A dramatic lawsuit is not the same as a winning case. You can shout accusations on the rooftops, weaponize the press, flood the internet with victim narratives. But when the moment of truth comes, only the facts matter. And here, the facts didn't just whisper, they screamed. Baldwin's team brought the receipts, and those receipts were a death sentence for Blake's case. From that moment on, there was no recovery, no rebound, no rewriting the narrative. There was only the slow, painful realization that the story she built so carefully was nothing more than a house of cards, and Brian Friedman had just blown it to the ground with undeniable proof. They were presented as mere statements of fact, the kind of boilerplate scaffolding meant to establish the framework of a claim. But in this case, every statement became a nail in Blake's coffin. Her entire narrative, one so carefully stage-managed by a PR machine that prided itself on manufacturing headlines and polishing reputations, is now collapsing in full public view. Blake's PR team looks less like strategists and more like survivors clinging to debris after a shipwreck. They are on life support, and you can practically hear the panic reverberating through their offices. This is the same team that once fed media outlets glossy copy, painting Blake as Hollywood's eternal damsel in distress, the starlet unfairly maligned, the victim of powerful forces conspiring against her. But now that the truth is leaking, through filings, through evidence, through raw receipts, their polished storylines have disintegrated. The puff pieces that once appeared like clockwork stopped overnight. Mainstream outlets went eerily silent, no longer willing to risk their credibility by amplifying a collapsing story. Hollywood insiders, once cautious in their whispers, now say openly that Blake is finished. It is brutal to watch a star spiral, when no one steps forward to protect her, when the safety net of influence and spin evaporates. The glossy shield that once seemed impenetrable has vanished, and what's left is raw exposure, the kind that destroys careers. The fallout isn't just reputational, it's financial devastation on a scale most people cannot even begin to comprehend. Blake isn't just facing criticism in the press. She is staring down lawsuits valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, figures so astronomical they hang over her like a wrecking ball ready to swing. At one point, estimates pegged her exposure at more than $650 million. And even if she were worth a fraction of that on paper, no individual can simply absorb those numbers. Once you factor in penalties, statutory damages, interest, and the multiplier effect of compounding claims, the picture morphs from dire to nightmarish. It isn't just a bad case, it is financial annihilation. And perhaps that was the moment Merle Conan, her lawyer, realized the truth. Imagine waking up, reviewing the latest filings, seeing the impossible math, and realizing that staying attached to the case wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. She likely stared at the wreckage one morning and thought, I'm not tanking my reputation over this circus. Who could fault her? From the very beginning, this lawsuit wasn't tethered to hard evidence. It was scaffolding without foundation, a house of mirrors built out of nothing more than PR spin, smoke, and spectacle. The deeper you look, the hollower it becomes. No credible documentation of harassment. No paper trail backing body-shaming claims. Not even a single receipt about the supposed breastfeeding issues that have been trumpeted so loudly to the press. Just theatrical accusations, dramatic sound bites, and emotional narratives with no proof behind them. It was as if Blake borrowed a storyline straight from her Gossip Girl days, forgetting that real courts don't adjudicate melodrama. They demand evidence. That's why Brian Friedman's strategy was so devastating. He didn't just file an opposition. He buried Blake's case beneath a mountain of cold, hard facts. Emails, texts, contracts, and communications painted a picture that her team's PR gloss couldn't hide. He proved her side wasn't leaning on evidence at all. It was leaning on headlines, on choreographed media spin, and on an ever-shifting sob story designed for sympathy, but unfit for scrutiny. I've combed through those documents myself. Every email, every text, every filing. And the pattern is impossible to ignore.
But I'm just a guy that woke up after 30 years and realized that I was living in a state of conflict. Conflict with who I feel I am in my core.
When Baldwin's team came swinging with their cache of undeniable evidence, Blake's legal counsel saw the writing on the wall. Quitting became less a choice and more a necessity. A lifeboat to avoid going down with the wreck. But the irony is that her PR team still thought they could pull off a magic trick, still believed they could substitute illusion for reality. They produced filings that contradicted themselves, full of absurdities, the kind of evidence so flimsy it was practically comedy, inadmissible for multiple reasons, and revealing more about their desperation than their strength. It was a theater of the absurd, and it only fueled their downfall. Take that infamous December 2024 New York Times article, remember it? Blake's team pushed it like it was a holy grail of her defense. A carefully crafted puff piece designed to cast Baldwin as the villain and Blake as the ultimate victim. They leveraged the prestige of the Times, betting that the media's halo effect would protect her. But fast forward to today, and that strategy has aged like milk left out in the sun. Baldwin's lawyers dismantled the narrative point by point, proving that the media had been spoon-fed Blake's version of events with barely a fact-check in sight. It's more than embarrassing, it's damning. It revealed a deliberate manipulation of the press, and worse, it underscored that the lawsuit wasn't about truth. It was about power, image, and deception. And here's where it gets even more grotesque. The very PR team Blake hired to protect her reputation has become a liability in their own right. Names once associated with glossy Hollywood image-making, like Leslie Sloan, are now inked into Baldwin's counterclaims, facing a $400 million lawsuit of their own. Imagine fumbling so badly that your spin doctors become co-defendants. With discovery in full swing, their secrets are dangling by a thread. Confidential texts, backroom deals, contract with media outlets, and strategies for planting narratives are all sitting in databases waiting to be exposed. And Baldwin's team isn't holding back. They're dropping receipts with surgical precision, each one detonating like a bomb. The harder Blake's camp scrambles to contain the fallout, the bigger the explosion grows, as if their own efforts to cover flames only feed the fire. And here lies the ultimate irony. Blake's entire camp spent years mastering the art of narrative control, only to learn, in the most public way possible, that courts don't care about spin. Judges don't rule on headlines. Juries don't weigh puff pieces. In the end, the only thing that matters is cold, hard evidence. And Blake has none. Her lawyer knows it. That's why she walked. Her PR team knows it. That's why they're flailing. Hollywood knows it. That's why the whispers are growing louder. And the public? They definitely know it. What's left is a chilling picture. Blake standing in the ruins of her carefully fabricated story, watching it disintegrate in real time, clinging to the fantasy that she still has a chance, while every ally has either abandoned her or turned into collateral damage. The only person who still believes Blake can win is Blake herself. And that delusion, more than anything else, may be her final undoing. She's clinging to this lawsuit like it's her last power move, gripping it with white knuckles as though it's the only rope left keeping her afloat. But the cruel irony is that it isn't a lifeline at all. It's the anchor that's dragging her deeper and deeper into the abyss. Hollywood has no patience for someone who tried to game the system, got exposed in the harshest spotlight imaginable, and now scrambles to recast herself as the victim after the entire scheme spectacularly imploded. The industry thrives on reinvention and survival of the fittest, but has no sympathy for a self-inflicted downfall. And let's be clear, this wasn't some random, overnight implosion. This train wreck was months in the making. Blake's team spent endless time orchestrating media manipulation, pulling desperate PR stunts that look glamorous on Instagram but hollow in reality, and leaning on laughably bad legal strategies that were doomed from the start. They tried smoke and mirrors, carefully planted leaks, and glossy profiles in elite publications. But when Brian Friedman finally dropped the receipts, that entire house of cards crumbled in a single deafening crash. Suddenly, everything they had built, the image, the narrative, the victimhood costume, turned to dust. The impact was brutal. It wasn't just a couple of texts or a messy back and forth. No, Friedman dropped a towering stack of 170 pages of receipts, cold, hard, undeniable receipts. Emails, texts, documented exchanges, timelines, corroborated facts. The kind of evidence that doesn't wobble under cross-examination. The kind of paper trail that doesn't just poke holes in the opposition story, but rips it to ribbons. For every allegation she tossed out, there was a corresponding document, a timestamp message, or a verified record proving the exact opposite. It wasn't he said, she said anymore. It was Blake versus her own receipts, and the receipts won every time. And then there was the media angle, perhaps the most humiliating blow of all. Blake had genuinely believed she had the press wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger. And for a while, it actually seemed true. That flashy New York Times piece, dripping with bias, was practically a love letter to her narrative. The headline alone, "We Can Bury Anyone," had her floating on air, convinced she was untouchable. The article treated every outlandish accusation as though it were gospel truth, painting her as the fragile victim of a Hollywood machine run amok. For a brief, glittering moment, she believed she had weaponized one of the most powerful newspapers in the world. But that fairy tale collapsed with stunning speed. Friedman's legal response didn't just poke holes in the article, it shredded it beyond recognition. He accused the Times of stepping outside the bounds of fair report privilege, of abandoning journalism, and becoming an active participant in Blake's PR campaign. Instead of writing, Blake lively alleges XYZ. They wrote as though her claims were already proven, packaging lies as if they were facts. They dressed up rumor as reporting, innuendo as investigation, and when challenged, they had no proof. None. Friedman exposed the Times for what had become in this case, not a newspaper, but a propaganda arm. The so-called shield that Blake thought she had in her corner? Gone. Torn to pieces. Judge Lyman himself even hinted that the Times might be tossed out of the case altogether. That wasn't just a procedural note. It was a flashing neon sign that their masterpiece of journalism was nothing more than trash in judicial eyes. And with that, Blake's last great safety net, her media armor, was dangling by a single frayed thread. If that thread snapped, she would be left standing in the cold, with no glossy headlines to save her, no puff pieces to soften the blow, just the cold, brutal reality of the courtroom, where spin means nothing and receipts mean everything. Even Hollywood insiders who once nodded along began turning. Lady C, one of the industry's most cutting commentators, didn't bother with polite language. She flat out called the whole media circus Blake's personal propaganda machine. And she wasn't wrong. For months, the press had been less about truth and more about serving as Blake's megaphone, amplifying her victim act. But with Friedman's bombshell in play, that megaphone was shattered. The media wasn't shielding her anymore. It was exposing her. She thought she could bury Baldoni with headlines and public pity. Instead, she dug her own grave with them. And just when you thought it couldn't possibly get worse for her team, it did. Her new lawyer, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps out of incompetence, essentially threw her under the bus in official court filings. Buried in the dry legal language was a stunning admission. Blake Lively, their client, was struggling with profound mental health issues. Yes, you heard that right. Her own defense didn't just fail to protect her image. They practically diagnosed her in the court record for the entire world to read. It was a jaw-dropping blunder. Instead of mounting a strong legal case, they introduced evidence that could make her look fragile, unstable, and unfit to stand a battle she herself started. And the fallout was immediate. Suddenly, her team was begging the court for an attorney's eyes only protective order. They weren't just trying to shield legal strategy. They were in full-on panic mode, desperate to keep the juiciest, most damaging details locked away, especially the ones about her mental health, her security fears, and the private cracks in the public persona she had worked so hard to maintain. In the end, what was meant to be her big, powerful lawsuit became the perfect storm of humiliation, a collapsing case, a shredded media shield, and now a defense team scrambling to contain the fallout of their own reckless admissions. Blake thought she could play chess with the system. Instead, she's checkmated by her own moves. I mean, if everything was really so innocent, why the frantic rush to keep it all sealed tight? If Blake had nothing to hide, she wouldn't be scrambling like her life depended on it. Yet here she is, with Ryan Reynolds right beside her, filing urgent requests to keep their text messages and private exchanges buried under lock and key. Not just any messages, either. We're talking about conversations with high-profile Hollywood names, the kind of people who don't want their fingerprints anywhere near this legal disaster. Confidentiality, they say, is about protecting privacy. But to the outside world, it looks like pure damage control, a desperate attempt to keep the ugliest truths from spilling into daylight. Blake's entire world is imploding in real time. Her lawyer abandoned ship after Justin Baldoni's team dropped that brutal 170-page stack of receipts. Pages so thorough and devastating that they left her case in ruins. Every claim she made, shredded. Every accusation, neutralized. And the slick PR machine that once propped her up, spinning stories and shaping narratives, is now barely sputtering. Clinging to life support, the New York Times piece she leaned on as her holy grail of credibility is being ripped apart in open court, called out as biased propaganda rather than journalism. Media outlets that once parroted her claims without hesitation are now backing away, terrified they'll be dragged into the mess themselves. Insiders, critics, and commentators are openly calling the whole saga what it is, an ethical train wreck of epic proportions. Even her supposed safety net, the inner circle she thought would shield her, has been sucked into the fallout. Leslie Sloan, her longtime PR chief and trusted gatekeeper, is named in a staggering $400 million lawsuit, the kind of legal monster that can't be brushed aside with clever spin. Discovery looms like a guillotine, threatening to drag out confidential texts, backroom plans, and whispered strategies that could expose just how manufactured Blake's victim narrative really was. And in the middle of all this, her new lawyer blundered so badly that he might as well have set her entire defense on fire. In official filings, he revealed that Blake is struggling with profound mental health issues, handing her critics a weapon they never would have dared touch otherwise. Think about that for a second. Instead of building her case, her own lawyer essentially diagnosed her in the court of public opinion. It was a shocking, almost surreal mistake, the kind that leaves even seasoned attorneys shaking their heads. Now her team is begging the court for an attorney's eyes only protective order, desperate to keep the most damaging details sealed off from public consumption. They're not just protecting legal strategy. They're trying to bury the skeletons rattling around in Blake's closet before discovery drags them all into the open. But here's the problem. The harder they fight to keep things secret, the guiltier it looks. Judge Lyman himself has raised eyebrows, openly questioning whether the protective orders are about safeguarding legitimate privacy or just a frantic attempt to hide the truth. And the speculation has already taken on a life of its own. Whispers of narcissism, personality disorders, manipulative behavior, they're everywhere. Commentators, gossip columnists, and even armchair psychologists are dissecting her every move, connecting dots, painting a picture of someone spiraling out of control. The narrative has shifted. She's no longer the fragile victim. She's a manipulator caught in her own web. And here's where it gets even messier. Her personal life, once marketed as the perfect Hollywood marriage, is now circling the drain. Multiple verified sources, real insiders, not tabloid rumor mills, confirm that Blake and Ryan aren't even living together anymore. The carefully curated image of red carpet bliss, of playful banter in interviews and Instagram couple goals, has been exposed for what it is: PR smoke and mirrors. According to U.S. Weekly, insiders describe their relationship as a roller coaster of good days and bad days. Translation? The cracks are showing. The mask is slipping. What the world once saw as enviable perfection is actually the relationship on the brink. Think about the stakes here. This lawsuit isn't just wrecking Blake's career. It's pulling Ryan down with her. Hollywood insiders are already whispering the big D word: divorce. And honestly, at this point, it wouldn't be shocking at all. Ryan, for all his charm and marketability, is chained to a lawsuit that's already been exposed as hollow, propped up by nothing but PR illusions. Every time they appear together, the tension is palpable. Their fake smiles look forced, their body language stiff. It's so awkward you'd need a chisel to cut through it. Meanwhile, Blake's friendships are disintegrating just as quickly. Remember her long-standing bond with Taylor Swift. Once a crown jewel in her image of cool girl Hollywood royalty, that's strained, maybe beyond repair. Blake tried to drag Taylor into the circus, even attempting to weaponize her name during production drama to pressure Baldwin. Taylor isn't thrilled, to put it mildly. And Anna Kendrick? When she stood beside Blake for promo appearances, the discomfort was written all over her face. She kept her answers clipped, her energy low, while Blake scrambled to plaster on a smile. It wasn't chemistry. It was damage control. At this point, the pattern is undeniable. Blake is burning through her relationships, her career credibility, and even her marriage faster than she can rebuild any of it. The bridges are going up in flames one after another, leaving her isolated in the middle of the inferno she lit herself. And so, what's left? A woman clinging to a lawsuit that's sinking beneath her feet, a PR strategy that's collapsed into ashes, a marriage unraveling before the public's eyes, a media empire that no longer bends to her narrative, mental health struggles spilled into public record, the industry no longer fooled, no longer charmed, no longer willing to play along. Blake wanted control. She wanted the power to dictate the story. Instead, she's lost control of everything. The lawsuit she thought would bury her enemies has become the coffin she built for herself. Ryan Reynolds may still be flashing smiles with cameras, but the truth